Welcome to One on One, the Daily Items weekly digital program featuring Susquehanna Valley newsmakers, interviewed by Daily Item reporters. Today's guest is Nick Clark, Associate Professor of Political Science at Susquehanna University, interviewed by Rick Dandies.
Up your new car game in March with a new Kia for just $99 a month from Sunbury Motors Kia. You heard right. Lease a 2019 Kia Forte LX for just $99 a month for only 24 months. Drive away in a 2019 Kia Soul for only $149 a month. With deals like this, you'll have to hurry in to get in under the buzzer.
Welcome to One on One, the Daily Items weekly digital program. Our guest today is Nick Clark, Associate Professor of Political Science at Susquehanna University. Welcome, Nick. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Politics is simmering now. We're now maybe like a year away from, I guess there are even going to be some debates scheduled now, Democratic debates in June and July. So I think maybe we'll start by talking about the large number of candidates. I mean, there may be 14 or 15 Democrats. Is it too early, too soon to have that many? Is there a danger that the Democrats might alienate a more progressive side?
Well, it's definitely a larger field than what Democrats are used to. I think it's been a long time since the Democratic Party has had a field quite that large. I mean, it might be 92 even. It doesn't surprise me it's this soon, just because the timetable for running these has been pushed back so much that whether there were 15 candidates or 8 candidates, anyone that wanted to be competitive really has to sort of get started now. If you have a bit more name recognition like Joe Biden, you can maybe wait a little bit longer. But some of these candidates are benefiting by getting out there right now, which is what they're trying to do. But I think it's a function of not having a natural incumbent or front runner in the party. So Biden and Bernie Sanders would probably be the closest thing. We have the two front runners, but I think even then nobody thinks those two are in any way a given. So,
I don't know if Biden is actually, he has hinted at it any day now that he's going to join the fray.
He has not formally announced. Well, he kind of did in that he mistakenly, indicated that he was about to announce at one of his press events recently.
He's named a vice presidential candidate.
Yeah.
Did you hear that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so he's. I mean, it'd be shocking if he didn't run at this point. I think he's in the field. So, but yeah, I mean, given that there's not an incumbent politician in the White House and not necessarily a natural front runner, you're going to have more people tossing their hats in the ring. There's some debate over how competitive the election will be. I think a lot of people think it'll be quite competitive, that the president's vulnerable. But that said, there are some models out there that are predicting that he's got a strong chance at re-election because of the state of the economy, because he's an incumbent. So I think people are really trying to play with that. I think a lot of the Democratic candidates think that he's ripe for defeat. And so that's another incentive to jump in, right? Because if you can get the Democratic nomination, then you think you might be more competitive for actually getting the presidency. But yeah, it's certainly a large field.
Do you see some parallels to the Republican large field in I guess 2015 when there were 15, 16 candidates? I mean, there was no incumbent president.
Yeah, well, I think that the Republicans saw the same opportunity then. I mean, they also did in 2012. They had a fairly large field at that point as well, and I think that was more because there was no front runner within the party. I think the same thing repeated in 2016, where, again, no clear front runner in the Republican Party, but at the same time, I mean, we are a country that does not like to keep the same party in power for more than 2 terms. We did it with Reagan and Bush, but outside of that, we alternate at least every 8 years, and so I think back in 2016, Republicans saw a real chance at taking the White House back, and it was the same deal where, people I think were thinking if you can win the nomination, then you've got a good shot at actually winning the presidency.
I think there's an interesting parallel also. You had Donald Trump running against the establishment. And he took on the establishment, and I think that there was a large portion of the population that gravitated to that because they were fed up with how government works. Here I'm seeing progressives to the left and kind of center left. Do you think they'll battle it out? You think?
I think we're definitely seeing something similar to what we saw with the Tea Party and the center of the Republican Party in 2010, with John Boehner sort of facing off against the Tea Party caucus. We now have Nancy Pelosi trying to sort of rein in and keep on check, ACO and some of these new members of Congress that have been elected. And it really is the same thing where, I mean, Boehner was very conservative, but got cast as the moderate by virtue of these new guns that sort of came in Congress back then. I mean, Pelosi's quite liberal, but now she's almost being thrown in the center, trying to keep and check people on the left. I think in the presidential group, I mean, they vary from how far to the center of the left they are. Probably Bernie Sanders is on more the fringes of the left, and I think you're right that certainly fueled some appeal for him when he ran 4 years ago, and he's certainly had some success in seeing us now.
Well, when I talked about divisiveness, I mean, there was almost a sense of divisiveness when Sanders did not get the nomination, and there was a portion of people who followed him said, oh, sure, we're going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but I'm not sure there was a lot of engagement and excitement about that, which might have helped Donald Trump win Pennsylvania. I should say that before we started this conversation, you were talking about some of the states that you thought that might be in play this presidential cycle. Could you talk about Pennsylvania and some of the other states?
Well, I think part of what allowed President Trump to win the last go-around were Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Obviously, Ohio and Florida had always been competitive, and he took Ohio with not much difficulty at all. Florida was a little closer, but he won that pretty handily. Those three states were really close. It was under 100,000 votes across them. And they were noteworthy because they had gone Democratic, really almost every year since 88 or 84.
Yeah.
I don't think, part of the issue with that was that Clinton really just took them for granted. She didn't visit Wisconsin or Michigan that much. The Democrats aren't doing that this go-around. They're going to have their convention in Wisconsin, and they even chose that over Miami. I think that President Trump's going to have a harder time retaking Wisconsin and Michigan than he is with Pennsylvania, because I think we're a much more genuinely purple state that can go either way. Even though in the presidential races we've tended to vote Democrat, the margin's always been closer. We've always been more competitive as far as that goes. And so, if I were the Trump campaign developing strategy, Pennsylvania is one of the states I would think that you could keep and that you might invest more time in. And so I expect that we'll continue to get a lot of attention in this next election.
He might actually show up in different parts of the state.
Yeah, well, he did he did 4 years ago too, but I think he'll continue to.
Well, he has some strong advocates. He had Lou Barletta and Tom Marino, his leading, people who were for him from the very beginning.
Yeah, he's got strong support, and in some previously Democratic areas of the state as well. I think when you talk about Democratic supporters that flipped to Trump in 2016, and maybe even a few that liked Bernie Sanders but ultimately voted for Trump, I think some of them were here in Pennsylvania, right where we live. So,
yeah. Nick, I'm curious. Are students engaged yet? Is it too early for them?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly the students I see in political science are probably a bit more so. They're self-selecting into that major or classes as a consequence. But, I think that they're reflecting heightened interest across the country. SU, I think, is somewhat more unique than a lot of colleges and universities in that our student population probably better reflects the public. We have almost an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. We have Trump supporters, and we have supporters of sort of Bernie Sanders and the liberal left. And so we see probably some more of the conversations that are happening in the broader public. And it's energized. I don't think normally, from one election to the next, between 2016 and 2020, you'd sort of see this slope in interest, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've gone down quite as far. I think the bottom, has been much higher, so interest has been kind of maintained.
Well, we certainly have a president who keeps saying things and doing things that are newsworthy, and whether you're on his side or against what he says,
right? Yeah,
pay attention to him. He's brilliant in that respect.
Yeah, whether you like the president's Twitter account or not, and I know even some strong supporters of the president that don't like his Twitter feed. The fact of the matter is it maintains high interest. It keeps people paying attention.
Well, I think people will be writing about this presidency for decades to come.
Yeah, it broke a lot of conventional wisdom that we have about both presidential campaigns and presidencies themselves in terms of his ability to succeed and how he succeeded specifically, and then sort of the decisions that he's made.
Okay. We're talking with Nick Clark, and we'll be right back.
Up your new car game in March with a new Kia for just $99 a month from Sunbury Motors Kia.
Wanna see you in a Kia. Sunbury Motors Kia.
You heard right. Lease a 2019 Kia Forte LX for just $99 a month for only 24 months. Drive away in a 2019 Kia Soul for only $149 a month. With deals like this, you'll have to hurry in to get in under the buzzer.
We're back, and we're speaking with Nick Clark, Associate Professor of Political Science at Susquehanna University. Nick, let's pick up the conversation with something I heard you speaking about a few days ago when you gave a speech at Susquehanna University. And it's a fascinating subject. You talked about the importance of being a knowledgeable voter, whether you're a conservative, a liberal, progressive, independent. Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, so I think the research on this topic now sort of says that what's important isn't whether you're conservative or liberal. You know, what our system needs are both. What's important is that you have the information that you need to act on your conservative principles or on your liberal principles. Which is why this notion of fake media that gets put out there is particularly problematic, because it means having the basic facts, not just about how our institutions work and who our leaders are, but the sort of issues that we're talking about today and what those mean in the background. And the problem is if we don't have the fundamental facts about different issues, we might not be able to decide how those align with our own values and act accordingly. Mm-hmm. So we want conservatives to act on conservative principles and liberals to act on liberal principles, and that means that they have as full an information as possible.
And that really accounts for the popularity of a Fox News, because they come from a position of discounting their evening kind of editorializing. They still come from a conservative point of view, and if you are conservative and you're searching for the right kind of news outlet, that fits your life view.
Right. Well, there's a strand of thought that's really accepted right now, which is that something like Fox News is essential, and MSNBC for that matter, to political knowledge, because the problem that's conceived is that if you're talking about this ideal notion of a voter and that they have as much knowledge as possible to act in an informed capacity, most people just don't have the time. I mean, particularly if we're talking about local government, state government, national government, all the issues going on, all the politicians, the time investment it would take to follow everything with the sort of detail required to be this kind of knowledgeable voter that theorists talk about is just too much. Mm-hmm. And so something like Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or the Daily Item, something that you can pay attention to for a while and decide that it reflects your own values, it reflects your own preferences, that when there's information being provided or even when there's opinions being provided, when there's editorializing, that those are generally going to reflect your own preferences. And so anytime a new issue comes on the agenda, you don't have to go out and spend 6 hours on the internet trying to find government documents and getting to the core of what it is. You can trust that whatever source you've identified, whether it's a political party or a media outlet, that they reflect your views and you can just turn to them to get what you need.
And it's important for a democracy to function to have knowledgeable voters.
Right. I mean, that really does go back, as far as Plato in terms of political philosophy, that, the purpose of government is to serve the public. Yeah. We as a public are not always united on what we want, but that's sort of another thing that government provides is a platform to work that out. We come together and we make decisions collectively that, balances our different views. But that can only happen if people are fully aware, not just of what their views are, but how those views are reflected in the different choices that are in front of them.
And some of the other things you talked about were, it's I'm trying to think of what I'm saying, very personal, and almost. But the problem is when it almost to the exclusion of listening to alternative points of view.
Yeah, well, that's, the counterpoint to that argument that the media is a good thing is, of course, media can sometimes, more media than media, political leaders and political parties can distort facts if it's in their interest, mm-hmm. right? So you might have Democrats who have trusted in the Democratic Party or Republicans that have trusted in the Republican Party and believe what those parties are saying, and the parties might come a little unglued from those core principles and start advocating issue positions that are not necessarily consistent with the core values or especially with the interests of their constituents. And if you haven't, if you're not really up on the issue and you're just sort of, kind of paying attention half the time and just sort of listening to what your media source says, right. Then you're not going to necessarily know that parties diverged from that. and that's where we can maybe start to see government that's not necessarily advocating for its citizens.
I thought something that was funny or interesting actually when you were talking about how if you're voting for a municipality, you don't vote for a local commissioner based on his opinion about the military, the U.S. military. There are different levels, so you should be knowledgeable about every level of government that you vote for.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that we excel at in the United States, partly because we are a federal system, and that even when I give an example like that, it sounds a little weird to Americans, because of course you don't vote for mayor based on national defense, and
Right.
you don't vote for president based on trash collection, right? But in other countries, right, especially, so some of my research is focused on Europe, they don't have those same federal traditions. They have basically the national government and that's it. So those citizens aren't oriented to this idea that you're voting on local issues and local elections and national issues and national elections and so on. And so we see situations where like questions like the EU, like Brexit in the UK.
Yeah.
Should the United Kingdom stay in the EU? Well, this idea of a competent, knowledgeable voter would be voting based on what they think of the EU. Yeah, I don't like the I think we need to get out of there because it's a bad thing, or I love it.
Right.
But we know there's a lot of voters over in the UK and in Europe that when they cast a ballot like that, it's not about the EU. It's not about the sort of question in front of them. It's about whether they think the government's doing a good job or not. And that might be a good reason to cast a vote in the end, but maybe not in like a referendum or in a local election. And so the sort of research I've done in this area that looks at that says, I think that's partly a function of the sort of system you've operated in. For Americans, we're very easily, it's easy for us to adopt this sort of federalist perspective because we grow up in this. We have local government. It means something here. In a place like France that only has really a national government because it's a unitary system, there's not this same socialization to the idea that local government or state government is its own entity. And so you don't see citizens really behaving in that way in those types of elections.
I wonder what's going to happen with Brexit. What do you think?
I think
That's
they'll
been an
leave.
area of your expertise. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think that the UK's. They just voted to ask for an extension. The EU has come back and said we'll only give you an extension if you back Theresa May's plan. I don't think Parliament's going to back it. In fact, she just gave a speech a couple hours ago that alienated a lot of members of Parliament. So I don't think her plan and this third vote's going to get any more support than it did before. And if that's the case, I think in about a week they're going to crash out without a deal. So, and some people say that's a good thing. We'll find out.
We should see. We shall see.
Yeah.
That's it for today's edition of One on One. Our thanks to our guest Nick Clark, and to all of you for watching.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to tune in next week for another installment